I may not be able to answer all the questions, but I certainly can point you in the direction of a modest attempt to start raising if you like, the big questions. Umesh has presented us with a very interesting problem, or very interesting sort of matter of fact. That is, we no longer live in times when media is a public good. Okay? I mean, media forms are not public goods anymore. I mean, they do not stand for something that is good for society. I'm not saying this with regret or with I mean, maybe regret, but I'm not saying it in a condemnatory way. I'm saying it as a matter of fact. What is this history of the commodification of media? We could take it back perhaps to the beginning of publications that were sold rather than distributed freely or printed for keeping records. The earliest books that were sold in India, for example, printed books, were religious. So we live, I mean, this is a good time for us to look back at the history of media as a commodity form. The newspaper, which we today decry as something which has lost its values, there's an essay out here which looks at a very important nationalist newspaper in Telugu, Andhra Patrika. If anyone here knows Telugu, you must have heard the name. The epitome of nationalist, good nationalist journalism. It turns out on close examination that the man was, apart from selling a newspaper, he was peddling his own Ayurvedic products. They were fake Ayurvedic products and patent medicines as they call them. Now this was the biggest nationalist newspaper in Telugu to have emerged at that time. So I'm not saying everybody is a crook and thief. I'm merely saying that once you recognize that news is a commodity, the medium is a commodity, it's a commercial entity. Then you first of all begin to look back at history in a slightly different light, and also understand better, I think, what's happening around us. The couple of claims that the editors of this book, including me, have made in this. A, media pervades all domains of contemporary life. We cannot understand politics if we don't understand the role played by the media. Yesterday were sessions on trolls. There have been several studies of the way in which Twitter is being used by major political leaders, and Facebook is being used to influence voters and so on. These are very old stories in some ways, even in India, because we go back to the film star politician as that figure who was supposed to have carried the masses with him into the polling booth and emerged victorious. So you can go back at the film star politician and say what was happening then that can illuminate us today. Look at other forms that are happening. The fact that forms of communication, mobile phone for instance, is also a form of leisure consumption. It's not only middle class people like you and me who are using it for leisure consumption, but as it turns out, some of the poorest of the poor are using the mobile phone to watch movies and music videos. There's a study which is here by a young PhD student. Nothing can be more close to the reality of the nexus between politics and business and media than IPL. Right? We agree? Is it cricket? Is it television? Is it more than television? Why does Airtel want to bid for IPL rights? So obviously it's content we're dealing with. We're not dealing with any discrete, unique form, autonomous form. Yeah, sorry. So there's also an essay on IPL by an Australian scholar who is also a commentator on cricket. Policy. What kind of policy do we have? Is silence, as in the Narsim Raoji's time, is the silence of the government actually a policy? You wait for things to calm down, you wait for, if you like, the Babri Masjid to collapse, you wait for all kinds of things to be grabbed by whoever is there to grab them, and then at the end of the day you say, yes, now we have a policy, which is to say status quo, whoever is grabbed whatever it is, let it be. Right? So, as a consequence, what you have is the emergence of a whole range of new players who are some of the biggest corporates in the country. On the one hand, Reliance, from petroleum to mobile phones, they're everywhere. Right? Now, at the same time, the mystery, the really science fiction element of it is that from roughly the 1940s, we've had very good documentation of the fact that film business has been losing money. right? 1940. We are not talking about, the good old golden age when people made good movies and good nationalist citizenry watched them and returned profits to them, to the producers. No. From 1940 through the 1950s, the golden age of Hindi and Telugu and other cinemas, the so-called golden age, till now, the figures remain more or less the same in terms of percentages. The number of films, the percentage of films which recover their cost is anywhere between 10 and 30, depending on whether it's a bad year or a good year. The other 70%, who puts the money in? Where is it coming from? So you follow the money. Is it Dawood Ibrahim's money? Is it the bootlegger? Is it the drug peddler? All of it perhaps. But there is an interesting way in which people make money in the media business, and that does not have to do with box office returns or cable TV subscriptions or other kinds of revenues that you think are the stuff of profit making. There are various ways in which, and the Bharat Shah story which is reported here is very interesting for that reason, ways in which money circulates and acquires value and accrues some profit for somebody, and we don't quite know what it is. Why was this big diamond merchant funding films which the size of his business, not taken into consideration, they're worth nothing for him? But why was he in the business? And why was Dawood Ibrahim in the picture at all? And we don't know exactly what the story is, and I'm not going to jeopardize myself and anything else by saying I know the truth. But the fact of the matter is that you can take all these names and try to understand what is the money that remains to be made in a business where 80% of films made are flops. Right? That's another story that we need to know. What about film stars? There's an essay here on the South Indian, my essay on the South Indian film star Rajinikanth. Same story. Not all of his films are hits. So why is he such an expensive film? There's obviously a reason why somebody wants to cast Rajinikanth in a film. Because Rajinikanth is a magnet for investment. His films may flop, but investors are flocking to him. Why do they flock to him? What kind of money does he make? Okay, so read the book and it's there.
So would you say, people use money for various things. I could be investing in a publication because it's a fashion book. The New Yorker does not make money, but the New Yorker is the New Yorker. It's worth reading. People make films out of passion. Sometimes a guy may make a film because he's in love with the woman, and it could be various reasons why you do certain things. Are we missing something here? Is it the lack of regulation? Is it the lack of regulation in terms of what content can be? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Specific reference to policy, as I said, the so-called policy paralysis of the Indian state could well be policy. One has to look at what it's facilitating and what it is not permitting. By not having a policy on something, the state very often is deciding that certain things will be allowed to continue and certain new enterprises, new initiatives will not begin. Number one. Second, in terms of culture, broadly speaking culture, media, journalism, all of it are considered to be culture, like education, cannot fund itself. I'm making a very large statement here. Culture cannot fund itself, education cannot fund itself. No matter what you may say about privatizing it, no matter what segments you want to privatize. What happens in the culture business is that somebody pays for cultural production. That somebody may be that idiotic producer who's gone and put his money from selling dry mirchi in Guntur district into Hyderabad, made a film which flops. What has he given us? He's given us a product, he's given us a film, a commodity which you watch on screen, on your cell phone, on your television set and on Amazon Prime. He's made no money. In other words, he has subsidized the production of that film. Every year, dozens of film producers have been arriving with money from elsewhere, funding the production of films, going away, having lost the money. So somebody pays for culture. Sometimes it is obviously the state. NFDC would fund some part of the production. Someone else. Sometimes it's a sponsor, as you have advertising as a kind of a, one way to look at it as a kind of a subsidy for the production of your magazine. These are legitimate ways of, subsidizing culture. We understand that. There are some which are legitimate, like I lose money in the stock market. I mean, it's legitimate in the sense the government has encouraged me to put my money in there, perhaps. I put it in there, it's gone. Who's benefited? Obviously the person's come out of the IPO who has made money there. Likewise, I make a film. News television. 400 odd channels on last count, I stopped counting after 2014. According to insiders, 1% of them, 1% of news television channels are making profits. none of the big television channels that we know are actually returning profits. You can go and look up their annual reports. NDTV, etc., have not given a dividend from 2007, right? And yet the share prices do not reflect the kind of money, the non-profitability of it, the valuations do not reflect it. Okay, so that's a science fiction economy which I don't understand very well. But clearly, somebody makes money, somebody subsidizes consumer production. I think the sooner we recognize it, the better it is. And how many of these players at the end of the day are going to remain in business is an open question. In terms of quality content, I'd say yes. I mean, newspapers had to be subsidized by advertising at one point of time. Today, cultural production is being subsidized by money that's coming in from the stock market. Right? Is this real economy or is it like a bubble economy? It's an open question. I think it's the latter, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, right now everything is good. There's a new report on the Indian media which says that it's growing phenomenally. The bad days are behind us, and so on and so forth. So we most strength to the media.
Have you explored in your studies the possibility of placing certain restrictions on what investments in the media can be like? Now, for instance, monopolies. Monopolies is an example. A lot of economies don't allow you to have cross holdings across TV, radio, and print, right? Which obviously doesn't exist over here. In terms of the kind of investments that you would draw into a media company, have you explored this as part of the media economy at all?
See, we've recognized, several authors in the collection of the 2 volumes have recognized that it's not easy to even figure out where the money is coming from and where it's going. It's not specific. I'm not saying media businesses are shady and every other business is good. There is, I mean, there's one story that I read, one conspiracy theory that I really subscribe to is that foreign direct investment that comes into India, a lot of it is actually Indian money that goes out and comes in. So when you follow the money, where do you go? You get lost very easily. You don't know. You can't trace it beyond the point. So I think asking for regulation, it's fine I understand, I support people who make these demands, but I also recognize that it may be unrealistic. The fact of the matter is that these businesses have a long history of opacity. They have a logic, they have a genius, if you like, that allows them to survive. And coming in there and saying rule number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 will regulate them is not realistic.
You feel there can't be regulation in terms of investment? Holdings and that kind of thing. How much should a person be allowed to own?
Yeah.
Right? What is known about the media companies? If it's a publicly listed company, it would be known.
Yeah.
Right? But is there no way in which regulation can work? Do you think there's scope for media to regulate itself? It has often been suggested that TV companies should actually come up with their own code of regulation. But to date, no TV company, no TV entrepreneur, even the most benign NDTV and so on, have actually been ready to bite this bullet. So is that a problem?
Yes, I mean non-compliance could sometimes be an issue. But I'm saying, we don't know who really owns a plot of land next to our houses. I mean, forget about complex entities like like a business which has foreign partners or foreign direct investment as well as LIC investment and so on and so forth. Though I think we have to recognize that media is a good point of entry into the mysteries of ownership in our country. Real estate is an obvious point, media is another. We don't know. I mean, how many media companies have come clean stating the investment of politically exposed persons? And yet, we say that every television channel in Tamil Nadu, not every, but several television channels in Tamil Nadu, yesterday it came up in one of the sessions, is owned by one political party or the other. This is what the story we hear. But in terms of actual ownership, is it traceable to the families of Jayalalitha or Karunanidhi and so on? In some instances, yes, but in other instances, no.
No, but so you may not be able to trace the money, which is difficult in any economy to do. So you're never going to figure out who puts his money where. But you can certainly define output. You can say that these are things that we are not going to do. These the things that we're going to do. And if once you've done, because what we do impacts X, Y, and Z in their homes and their thinking and their choices they make. So we as an industry or we as a society decide to regulate media and what it can do with its position, with the technologies it commands. Isn't there scope to regulate output and thereby make the investment more benign?
They may be slightly different problems. Regulating content, for instance, may be a slightly different kettle of fish than trying to regulate ownership.
Yeah, but wouldn't that make the investment more benign? Like, if I know I can't do this with a newspaper and I can't do this with a TV channel, right, I'm not going to then put my money into this, right? But, that's a call that society needs to take. And it's not taken. That's a call the media needs to take. I think the former SEBI chief, I was at a meeting where he told the media, he said, why don't you regulate yourself? Because you are going on to stock markets and these questions are going to be asked of you. That was all 15, 16, 18 years ago or something like that. And at that point of time, everyone said, NDTV included, CNN, IB, all these people, Raghav Bell, and so on, said yes. We are going to, you probably remember, we are going to create our own code of ethics. Not one part of that code was ever written. So, is there a scope to make investment more benign by in a sense saying that this is the kind of output we don't want because it hurts us? These are the parameters.
See, this is not covered, this particular example is not covered by any of the essays in the book, but from my older work I can take the example of N.T. Ramarao's election and Eenadu newspaper. The fact of the matter is that Eenadu's very partisan support to this emerging political party and politician was good for their business. Right? It resulted in the escalation of sales to some extent. 2014, there are studies which suggest that television channels which were airing content featuring Narendra Modi had better TRPs than others. So, even in the best of, most regulated of context, you find that choices are being made in terms of content because there is a viewership, there is a demand for it. Right? So, therefore, regulation of content saying that, look, let's now focus on development, let's focus on education, let's focus on those themes, may not quite be.
No, see, regulation could be not so much as let's focus on development, but more a question of that, you can't singularly promote anything. Right? These are the certain rules of the game by which you got to report or shoot or picture or present or whatever it might be. So, would there be scope for it? Would there be scope which would make that more benign, make misuse of the media more difficult?
No, I think in principle, yes, but practically, as I said, when you go back to the 1930s and 40s and see that the biggest names in nationalist publishing were already in the game, a game that you normally associate with Times of India from the 90s. Right? So, where is the evidence to suggest that the model that we think is good has ever been in practice? You might find half a dozen examples from different parts of the country. Broadly speaking, we've had newsprint being sold in the black market in the Indira Gandhi time. Right? The Indian Express story and all kinds of trouble they got into and so on. I'm not suggesting that we can't do better than that, or political leadership or the state cannot do better than that. But I'm saying that, look, our desire for a better society has to be balanced with a more realistic view of what's happening. And I think at least as far as goes of academics, I think our responsibility is to be realist. Yes, every one of us may condemn the increasing footprint that Reliance and half a dozen other entities have on the media scene on the whole. But at the same time, we have to tell you the story. We can't, start by saying, I condemn, and then give you nothing that gives you insights into what's happening.
Okay, so one last question before we break. What can be done to populate the media with more new initiatives? What can be done to fund enterprises, fund newer businesses which can use technology, which can use so many other things? Have any of your authors really looked at the possibilities that there are? Because we have a lot of skills, we have a lot of talented people, but they all seem to be caught in caught in a system from which they can't manage to escape.
Let me give you an example from a micro study on folk singers in Haryana and Bihar by Ratnakar Tripathi in one of the volumes. He points out that these singers release CDs and VCDs of their music and give away the rights to the producers for free. It's only a very rare and extraordinarily famous folk singer who is able to get 10,000 rupees or 1 lakh for a CD. They give away the rights free of cost to the VCD company, the recording companies. The recording companies are complaining bitterly about piracy, the fact that very few copies are officially sold. But since the content is coming to them, the copyright is coming to them free, IP is free, in the sense that the singer doesn't demand anything, they have some kind of a market for it. What happens is that they, have a running text with the mobile number of the singer, and the mainstay of the performer's business really is when people call him up on that number and invite him for a live
concert.
Right? So what's happening is that there's this digital music and all that happening, it would all be very good for a company going in for investment. We're going to digitize Bhojpuri folk music, great market. Look at the millions of people in India and Mauritius who listen to it. But the fact of the matter is that as far as the livelihood is concerned, this is how the new and old are coming together.
So Srinivas, thank you very much. We wish you great luck. This is the 2 volumes here, bunched together from the Oxford University Press. And we hope this makes it to every course